Vance, this was supposed to be the pinnacle. He stood near the edge of the room, a flute of vintage champagne dangling loosely from his fingers, untouched. At 45, he had built an empire from nothing, shaping the technological landscape of the continent. His name was on billboards, his face in magazines, and his bank account held numbers that most people could not even comprehend. Yet, as the orchestra swelled into a waltz, Ricardo felt a coldness settle in his chest that no amount of wealth could warm. "Ricardo, my friend, you're hiding in plain sight again," a voice boomed beside him. It was Marcus, a venture capitalist whose smile was as sharp as his suits. Marcus clapped a heavy hand on Ricardo's shoulder, steering him slightly toward the center of the room. "The board is buzzing. The merger with Asian Dynamics is practically signed. Do you realize what this means for your stock value?" By Monday morning, Ricardo forced a smile, the muscles in his face feeling stiff, uncooperative. "It means growth, Marcus. It means expansion." His voice was steady, practiced, the tone of a man who had answered this question 1,000 times. But inside, the words felt like ash. "Exactly. Growth," Marcus laughed, taking a large sip of his drink. "You're a machine, Ricardo. Sometimes I wonder if you ever sleep, or if you have a life outside of these walls." Marcus gestured vaguely around the opulent hall. "Though I suppose this is the life. Look at this crowd. Everyone wants a piece of Vance." Ricardo nodded, his eyes drifting away from Marcus's enthusiastic face. He wasn't listening to the talk of stocks or mergers. His attention was caught by a scene unfolding near the dessert table. A young couple stood there, laughing softly. They weren't celebrities or tycoons. They looked like ordinary people, perhaps invited as guests of a subsidiary partner. The man was kneeling slightly, wiping a smear of chocolate from the cheek of a little girl, no older than 6. The woman stood beside them, her hand resting gently on the man's shoulder, her smile radiant not because of the jewelry she wore, but because of the moment they were sharing. The little girl giggled, grabbing her father's nose, and the father feigned shock, making the child laugh even harder. A sharp pang struck Ricardo's heart, physical and sudden, like a missed step on a staircase. He tightened his grip on the champagne flute. The noise of the gala seemed to fade into a dull hum, the laughter of the guests turning into a distant echo. In that fleeting second, the opulence of the ballroom dissolved. He wasn't standing on marble. He was standing in the rain of a memory he had buried deep beneath layers of productivity and ambition. He remembered a different night. Not a gala, but a small apartment with peeling paint. Clara had been sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on a stomach that was just beginning to show the curve of life. He had been packing a suitcase. The argument hadn't been loud. It had been quiet, which made it worse. She had asked him to stay, just for the ultrasound. He had told her he couldn't, that the Tokyo deal waited for no one. He had chosen the deal. He had chosen the future he could see on a spreadsheet over the future growing inside her. He had told himself it was for them, that the money would secure their safety. But as he stood there in the ballroom, watching a stranger wipe chocolate off a child's face, he realized the lie he had told himself for years. Money secured assets. It did not secure presence. "Ricardo, did you hear me?" Marcus's voice cut through the haze. Ricardo blinked, returning to the present. The couple by the dessert table was moving away, disappearing into the crowd. The moment was gone. "Yes, Marcus. The merger. Monday." Marcus frowned, sensing the shift in Ricardo's demeanor. The enthusiasm dampened slightly. "You look tired, man. Maybe you've been pushing too hard. Even engines need maintenance." "Maybe," Ricardo murmured. He set the untouched champagne down on a passing waiter's tray. The silence between them grew awkward. Marcus was a man of transactions. He didn't know how to handle a moment of human vulnerability from a titan of industry. "Well, I'll let you mingle," Marcus said, patting Ricardo's arm again, though less vigorously this time. "Don't work too hard tonight. Enjoy the party." Ricardo watched him go, blending back into the sea of black and white ties. He felt like an actor on a stage who had forgotten his lines. The admiration in the eyes of the people around him felt heavy, like a coat made of lead. They saw the success, the mansion in the hills, the cars, the power. They didn't see the empty rooms waiting for him at the end of the night. They didn't see the silence of a house that had no laughter, no small footsteps running down the hallway, no one to ask how his day was without wanting something in return. He needed air. The room felt too small, the oxygen too thin. Ricardo navigated through the crowd, offering polite nods to faces he couldn't name, apologizing softly as he brushed past guests. He pushed open the heavy glass doors leading to the outer terrace. The cool night air hit him instantly, a stark contrast to the stifling warmth of the ballroom. The city skyline stretched out before him, a galaxy of artificial stars twinkling in the darkness. The hum of traffic below was a constant reminder of life moving forward, indifferent to his internal stagnation. He walked to the stone railing, gripping the cold surface with both hands. Below, the city lived. Thousands of windows glowed, each one a story, a family, a struggle, a joy. Somewhere out there, time had moved on without him. He closed his eyes and let the wind brush against his face. He thought about Clara. It had been years. He had heard rumors, of course. Whispers in business circles that she had moved away, that she had started over. He had never sought confirmation. It was easier to assume she was struggling, that she needed the distance. It justified his absence. If she was better off without him, then his sacrifice had meaning. But tonight, the justification felt weak. The image of the father and daughter by the dessert table had cracked the armor. He realized he didn't know who Clara was anymore. He didn't know what she looked like now, if her hair was still the same shade of brown, if she still smiled with her eyes before her mouth. And the child, his child. He had done the math in his head 1,000 times. The child would be 6 years old now. School age. Maybe they liked music or sports or drawing. Maybe they had his eyes. A sudden wave of dizziness hit him, and he had to steady himself against the railing. It wasn't illness, it was the weight of the unknown. He had spent years building a legacy of code and hardware, but he had neglected the only legacy that truly mattered. The success he had chased had become a cage. He had everything, yet he possessed nothing that could hold him when the lights went out. Mr. Vance Ricardo turned sharply. It was one of the event coordinators, a young woman holding a clipboard. She looked nervous to be interrupting him. "I'm sorry to disturb you. The organizers were wondering if you would be willing to say a few words on stage. The guests are expecting a speech about the new initiative." Ricardo looked at her, then back at the city lights. A speech. More words. More promises about a future he was no longer sure he wanted. He looked at his watch. The diamonds on the bezel caught the light, expensive and cold. "Not tonight," Ricardo said, his voice quiet but firm. The coordinator blinked, surprised. "Oh, but the donors. Tell them I'm not feeling well," Ricardo lied. He couldn't explain that he wasn't sick in body, but in spirit. "I'm leaving." "Of course, sir." "Shall I have your car brought around?" "No," Ricardo said, pushing off the railing. "I'll walk for a bit. I need to think." He walked back through the ballroom, ignoring the curious glances as he headed for the exit. He didn't stop to say goodbye to Marcus or any of the other partners. The noise seemed louder now, more intrusive. Every laugh felt like a reminder of what he was missing. As he stepped out into the cool night of the driveway, the valet rushed to bring his car, a sleek silver sedan that cost more than most houses. Ricardo thanked him quietly and slipped behind the wheel. He didn't start the engine immediately. He sat in the silence of the car, the leather seat comfortable but isolating. He looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. It had always been empty. He rested his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard. For the first time in years, Ricardo Vance did not know what his next move should be. There was no strategy for this, no market analysis, no risk assessment. There was only the hollow ache in his chest and the nagging question that whispered in the silence of the car, was it worth it? He turned the key, and the engine purred to life, smooth and powerful. He pulled out of the venue, merging into the traffic. He didn't drive toward his penthouse. Instead, he found himself driving without direction, letting the roads choose for him. The city blurred past the windows, streaks of light and shadow. He thought about the randomness of life, how a single choice, made in a moment of ambition, could ripple out years later to leave a man sitting in a luxury car, surrounded by wealth, feeling entirely alone. He tightened his grip on the wheel. He had spent years running toward something. Now, for the first time, he felt the urge to run back. But he didn't know if the path still existed, or if he had burned it down along the way. The uncertainty hung in the air around him, heavy and unresolved, setting the stage for a journey he hadn't planned but could no longer avoid. The out destination, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon and gold through the water. As he turned onto a quieter avenue, the buildings changed. The sleek glass towers gave way to older brick structures, some renovated, others worn by time. This was the outskirts of the downtown district, the area where the city had begun before it grew upward into the sky. Ricardo slowed the car. He knew this street. He hadn't driven here in years, perhaps a decade. The familiarity of it struck him with the force of a physical blow. There was the corner store where he used to buy coffee in the mornings. There was the park bench where he had once proposed. And there, down the block, was the apartment building. It looked smaller than he remembered, the paint peeling slightly near the fire escape, the brickwork darkened by years of soot and rain. He pulled the car over to the curb, putting it in park but leaving the engine running. The heat from the vents washed over him, but he still felt cold. As he stared at the building, the present moment began to dissolve. The sound of the rain on the roof of his luxury sedan faded, replaced by the sound of rain on a thin, rattling window pane. The smell of leather and new car air freshener vanished, replaced by the scent of old wood, dried herbs, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. Ricardo closed his eyes, and suddenly, he was not sitting in a silver sedan. He was standing in a small living room, a suitcase open on the floor between them. The memory was not a distant observation. It was vivid, immediate, as if time had folded back on itself. He could feel the stress tightening his shoulders, the same tension he had felt at the gala, but sharper, more desperate. He was younger then, his hair darker, his eyes less tired but filled with a frantic ambition. Clara stood by the window, her hand resting on the slight curve of her stomach. She was wearing an oversized sweater, the kind she wore when she was cold, her face pale in the dim light of the single lamp. "You don't have to go tonight, Ricardo," Clara said. Her voice was soft, lacking accusation, which made it harder to bear. She turned from the window, her eyes searching his face. "The flight is tomorrow morning. You could stay. Just for tonight. The doctor said the next checkup is critical." "I'm nervous." Ricardo zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was harsh in the small room. He didn't look at her immediately. He focused on the latch, clicking it into place. "I told you, Clara. The meeting in Tokyo moves up. If I'm not there to sign the preliminary agreement in person, the whole deal could slip. You know what this deal means." "I know what it means for the company," she replied, walking closer. She reached out, her hand hovering near his arm before dropping back to her side. "But what does it mean for us for him?" She looked down at her stomach. "He's going to be here soon, Ricardo. I don't want to be alone for the next few months. I need you here." Ricardo finally looked up. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he filtered it through the lens of his own logic. He told himself he was doing this for them. He told himself that once the money came, once the status was secured, she would never have to worry again. She would have the best doctors, the best house, the best life. He was building a fortress for them, brick by brick, even if it meant leaving them exposed during the construction. "I'm doing this for us," Ricardo said, his voice tight. He picked up the suitcase. It was heavier than it looked. "If I secure this merger, we won't have to worry about rent. We won't have to worry about anything. I'm building a future where you never have to be nervous again." Clara shook her head slowly, a sad smile touching her lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of realization. "You're building a future, Ricardo. But I'm not sure you're building it with us in it. You're talking about money. I'm talking about presence. I'm talking about being here when the baby kicks. I'm talking about knowing that when I wake up scared in the middle of the night, you're on the other side of the bed. I'll call every day," he promised, though he knew even as he said it that the time zones would make it difficult. "I'll send money. I'll set up the account." "It's not about the money," Clara whispered. She stepped back, putting distance between them. The space felt vast, like an ocean opening up in the middle of the cramped living room. "You think success is something you bring home in a briefcase. But success is who is waiting for you when you open the door. If you walk out that door now, you're telling me that whatever is out there is more important than what is in here." Ricardo felt a surge of defensiveness. He was tired. He had been working for 18 hours straight. He didn't have the energy for philosophy. He needed action. He needed victory. "You're being emotional, Clara. This is business. It's temporary." "Nothing is temporary," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Choices are permanent. You choose the business. You choose the trip. You choose to leave. Just know that you are choosing." He stood there, the handle of the suitcase digging into his palm. For a second, just a fraction of a second, he hesitated. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman he loved standing on the precipice of losing him. He saw the vulnerability, the hope that he would put the bag down. He could have put it down. He could have said, "You're right. I'll call them." But the fear of failure was louder than the love in the room. The fear of being ordinary, of being just another man in a small apartment with big dreams and no capital, paralyzed him. He tightened his grip on the handle. "I have to go," Ricardo said. He walked to the door. He didn't look back. If he had looked back, he might have seen the tear that finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. He might have seen her hand move to protect her stomach, as if shielding the child from the sound of the door closing. He opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and pulled it shut. The click of the latch was the final period on the sentence of their marriage. In the present, Ricardo gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was back in the car. The rain was heavier now, pounding against the roof. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His heart was racing, thumping against his ribs like a trapped bird. The memory hadn't just been a thought, it had been a reliving. He could still feel the weight of the suitcase. He could still hear the silence that had followed his departure. He looked at the apartment building again. The lights were on in some of the windows. Families living inside. Laughing, arguing, sleeping. He wondered which window had been theirs. He wondered if Clara had stood there after he left, watching him. Walked to the taxi. He wondered if she had cried. He knew she had. He had just refused to see it. A wave of nausea rolled over him. He rolled down the window, needing fresh air, needing to escape the confines of the car that suddenly felt like a coffin. The cold rain sprayed onto his face, mixing with the heat of his shame. He had told himself for years that it was necessary. He had told himself that the end justified the means. But sitting there, in the shadow of the life he had abandoned, the justification crumbled into dust. There was no merger big enough to buy back that moment. There was no stock option valuable enough to replace the look in Clara's eyes when she realized he wasn't coming back. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel. The leather was cool against his skin. "I was wrong," he whispered to the empty car. The words were barely audible over the rain, but they hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I was so wrong. He had thought he was building a legacy. But a legacy wasn't a company. It wasn't a bank account. It was the people who remembered you when you were gone. It was the children who knew their father's voice. He had traded presents for prestige, and now he was the richest man in the city with nothing to show for it but a hollow chest and a memory of a door closing. He sat there for a long time, the engine idling, the wipers sweeping back and forth like a metronome counting down seconds he could never get back. The temptation to stay there, to sit in the rain and let the guilt consume him, was strong. It would be easy to let the pain stop him here. But as the rain began to lighten, a new thought emerged from the darkness. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't unzip the suitcase and put it down. The door had closed. But doors could be opened again. Ricardo lifted his head. He looked at the apartment building one last time, committing the image to memory, not as a monument to his failure, but as a marker of where he had been. He put the car into drive. He didn't know where Clara was now. She wasn't in this building anymore. He knew that much. She had moved on. She had survived him. But he had seen her at the gala, or rather, he had seen the idea of her. And he had seen the children. The thought of the children sent a new jolt through him. They were out there, somewhere in the city, living, breathing, growing. They were the part of the legacy he hadn't destroyed. They were the bridge. He pulled away from the curb, the tires humming on the wet asphalt. The aimlessness was gone. He had a direction now, even if the path was unclear. He had to find them, not to buy them, not to fix the past with money, but to stand before them and admit that he had been wrong. The city lights seemed sharper now, less like a blur and more like a map. He drove with purpose, the rain washing the windshield clean, mirroring the clarity settling in his mind. The guilt was still there, a heavy stone in his pocket, but it was no longer anchoring him to the spot. It was fuel. He had spent years running away from the man he was in that apartment. Tonight, he would start running toward the man he needed to be. The road ahead was dark, winding through the wet streets of the city, but for the first time in years, Ricardo Vance was not driving away from each chill remained in the air, settling deep in Ricardo's bones. He sat in the back of his town car, the leather seat swallowing him whole, a tablet resting on his lap displaying the agenda for the day. They were heading to Silver Creek Estates, one of the most exclusive gated communities in the region. It was a place where privacy was bought and sold along with the land, where high walls and dense hedges kept the world at bay. Ricardo was there to meet with a potential partner, a reclusive developer named Mr. Henderson who preferred to conduct business on his own turf. It was a routine meeting, or it should have been, but nothing felt routine anymore. Since that night in the rain, Ricardo had mobilized a discreet team. He hadn't asked them to find Clara directly. He wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. He had asked them to find records, property deeds, anything that might hint at where she had landed after leaving the city. The search had yielded little. Clara was a ghost, moving through the system without leaving a digital footprint. She had changed her name, perhaps. She had protected herself well. The lack of information was both frustrating and admirable. It proved she was strong. It proved she didn't need him. "Mr. Vance, we are approaching the gate," the driver, Thomas, announced, his eyes meeting Ricardo's in the rearview mirror. "Security is expecting us." Ricardo nodded, sliding the tablet into his briefcase. "Thank you, Thomas." His voice sounded hollow to his own ears. He looked out the window. The trees here were older, their branches intertwining overhead to form a natural tunnel. The light filtered through in dappled patches, dancing on the hood of the car. It was peaceful here, removed from the frantic energy of the downtown district. Too peaceful. It felt like a place where secrets were kept. The car slowed as the security guard inspected their credentials. The gate slid open silently, and they glided into the community. The roads were wide, lined with manicured lawns that looked more like golf courses than yards. Each house was a statement of wealth, unique in architecture but uniform in opulence. Ricardo watched them pass, one by one. Colonial, modern, Mediterranean. He wasn't really seeing them. His mind was elsewhere, rehearsing the pitch for Henderson, thinking about quarterly projections. He forced himself to focus. He needed this deal. He needed the distraction. "Turn left here, Thomas," Ricardo instructed, reading the address from memory. "The Henderson residence is at the end of the cul-de-sac." Thomas navigated the curve. The road widened into a circular drive surrounded by 3 massive properties. The center one was obscured by a row of tall cypress trees. As the car emerged from the shadow of the trees, the house came into view. It was a sprawling white mansion with deep blue shutters and a wraparound porch that spoke of traditional elegance rather than modern flash. A stone fountain bubbled softly in the center of the driveway. Ricardo's breath hitched in his throat. He leaned forward, his hand instinctively gripping the front seat. "Stop," he said. The word was sharp, urgent. Thomas tapped the brakes, bringing the car to a smooth halt in the middle of the road, well before the driveway. "Sir, is something wrong? We're late." "Just stop," Ricardo repeated, his eyes fixed on the house. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the quiet hum of the engine. He knew this house. Not from brochures, not from the internet. He knew it from a memory buried deep beneath layers of business trips and forgotten years. 5 years ago, Ricardo had taken a weekend drive to scout this area for a potential resort development. He had been alone, restless, trying to escape the pressure of the Tokyo merger aftermath. He had driven through this neighborhood when it was newer, less established. He remembered stopping near this specific plot when it was just under construction. He had spoken to the foreman briefly. He remembered the foreman mentioning that the owner was a woman who had paid in cash, who wanted a home with a large porch for children to play on. At the time, Ricardo had dismissed it. It was just data, just another house in a sea of houses. But now, looking at the finished structure, the details rushed back with terrifying clarity. The blue shutters, the specific curvature of the porch railing, the oak tree planted near the entrance, now grown tall and sturdy. It was the same house. The memory collided with the present, creating a dizzying sense of vertigo. Was it possible that after all these years, after all the searching, fate had led him here under the guise of a business meeting? "Sir, Mr. Henderson is waiting," Thomas reminded him gently, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Ricardo didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off the front door. The curtains were drawn, but the house felt alive. There were toys scattered near the side entrance, a tricycle, a small red wagon. The sight of them sent a jolt of electricity through his veins. He felt a surge of hope so intense it was painful, mixed with a paralyzing fear. If he went up that driveway, if he knocked on that door, his life would change forever. There would be no going back to the empty penthouse, no going back to the man who chose business over family. "Thomas," Ricardo said, his voice trembling slightly. "Do you see the toys?" Thomas glanced toward the house. "Yes, sir. Looks like children live there." Ricardo opened the door. The cool air rushed in. "Wait here. Do not move the car." "Mr. Vance, the meeting." "Forget the meeting," Ricardo said, stepping out onto the pavement. His legs felt heavy, as if gravity had increased tenfold. He walked toward the driveway, his dress shoes clicking softly on the stone. Each step felt like a confession. He was intruding. He was invading the sanctuary she had built without him. He should turn back. He should call ahead. He should do anything but walk up that path unannounced. But he couldn't stop. The pull was magnetic. He reached the edge of the porch and stopped. He could hear sounds from inside. Laughter. The sound of a television. The clatter of dishes. Domestic sounds that he had denied himself for years. He raised his hand to knock, but his hand hovered in the air, frozen. What would he say? Hello, I'm the man who left you. I'm here to buy a company. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He lowered his hand. He wasn't ready. If this was her, he couldn't ambush her. She deserved better than a surprise appearance on her doorstep. She deserved an explanation, a proper apology, not a shock. He stepped back, retreating from the door. He turned around, looking at the house one last time, committing every detail to memory. The white paint, the blue shutters, the life inside. He walked back to the car, his mind racing. He needed to know for sure. He needed confirmation before he made his move. He got back into the car, closing the door softly. Are we proceeding to the door? Sir Thomas asked, watching him in the mirror. Ricardo stared at the mansion through the rear window as Thomas began to reverse. No, we're leaving. Leaving, sir, but Mr. Henderson. Reschedule, Ricardo said, his voice firm now, the decision solidifying. Tell them I had an emergency. Tell them anything. Just get us out of here. As the car turned away from the house, Ricardo felt a mix of relief and agony. He had found her. Or he had found where she might be. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a tangible target. He leaned back against the seat, closing his eyes. The image of the porch burned behind his eyelids. He had spent years building walls around himself, protecting his assets, protecting his heart. Now he realized the only thing that mattered was behind those white walls he had just left. He pulled out his phone and dialed his. Investigator. It's me, he said when the line connected. I need everything you have on the owner of the property at Silver Creek Estates, Lot 4. I don't care how you get it. I don't care what it costs. I need a name, and I need it by tomorrow morning. He hung up before the investigator could respond. He looked out the window as the gated community disappeared behind them. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the road. The suspense was unbearable now. He knew where she was. The question was no longer if he would see her again. The question was whether he was worthy of walking back up that driveway when he returned. He tightened his fist in his lap. He would be. He had to be. For the first time in his life, Ricardo Vance had a deadline that mattered more than money. He answers to the universe. The investigator had promised results by morning, but morning felt like a lifetime away. The car was moving slowly toward the exit of Silver Creek Estates, the tires crunching softly over the gravel transition back to asphalt. Thomas drove with the practiced smoothness of a man who knew when to speak and when to remain invisible. He sensed the turbulence radiating from the back seat, a storm contained within a tailored suit. Thomas, Ricardo said, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat, trying to dislodge the lump that had formed there. Pull over. Just before the gate. I need a moment. Thomas didn't question the order. He simply nodded in the mirror and guided the car to the shoulder of the road, nestled beneath the canopy of old oak trees that lined the entrance. The engine idled, a low hum that vibrated through the chassis. Ricardo looked out the window. From this angle, partially obscured by the branches of the trees, the white mansion was still visible in the distance. It stood stark against the darkening sky, a beacon of stability in a world that felt increasingly chaotic to him. Take your time, sir, Thomas said softly. Ricardo didn't answer. He found himself leaning forward, pressing closer to the glass, his eyes scanning the facade of the house he had just left. He told himself he was looking for confirmation, for any sign that his memory was playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew it wasn't trickery. It was destiny, or perhaps karma, circling back to collect a debt long overdue. As he watched, the front door of the mansion opened. A figure stepped out onto the wraparound porch. Ricardo's breath caught in his throat, stopping completely for a second before rushing back in a sharp gasp. It was her, Clara. Time had treated her differently than it had treated him. While Ricardo had accumulated lines of stress around his eyes and a weight of emptiness in his posture, Clara seemed to have grown into her own skin. She wore a tailored blouse and slacks, elegant but practical, her hair swept back in a way that exposed her neck. She held a phone to her ear, her posture upright, commanding. She wasn't just standing there, she was working. She was managing. She was owning the space around her. Ricardo watched, mesmerized and horrified. He saw her gesture with her free hand, a sharp, decisive movement that indicated she was giving instructions. She wasn't the hesitant woman from the small apartment anymore, the one who had pleaded with him to stay just for one night. That woman had been replaced by someone who stood on the porch of a luxury mansion as if she had built it with her own hands. And perhaps she had. The realization hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. He had left her with nothing, or so he had thought. He had assumed she would struggle, that she would need the safety net he refused to provide. He had convinced himself that his money was the only thing standing between her and ruin. But looking at her now, serene and authoritative, he saw the truth. She hadn't needed his money. She had needed his presence, and he had denied her that. And in the absence of his presence, she had found her own strength. She had built a life that didn't include him. The mansion wasn't a gift from a new husband. He would have heard rumors of a remarriage in his social circles. This was hers. Her success. Her sanctuary. Clara paused on the phone, listening intently. She turned slightly, looking out toward the gate, toward the trees where Ricardo hid in the shadows of his car. For a terrifying second, Ricardo thought she saw him. He froze, his hand gripping the door handle. But her gaze passed over the spot where he sat, looking through him, focused on something else entirely. She smiled then, a small, private smile that wasn't for anyone in the room with her. It was a smile of satisfaction. She ended the call, lowering the phone and looking out at her property. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the air of a life she controlled. Ricardo slumped back against the seat, the energy draining out of him. He felt small. Not the smallness of a child, but the smallness of a man who realizes he has been irrelevant to the most important story of his life. He had thought he was the protagonist, the hero who went away to slay dragons and bring back gold. But he was merely a footnote in her biography, a chapter she had closed and moved past. The pain was acute, sharper than the guilt he had felt at the gala. Guilt was about what he had done. This was about who she had become without him. Sir Thomas's voice broke the trance. "Is everything all right? You look pale." Ricardo wiped a hand over his face. He could feel the stubble on his chin, rough and unkempt despite his morning shave. "I'm fine, Thomas. Just tired. Should we proceed to the office, or would you like to go home?" Ricardo looked at the house one last time. Clara was still on the porch, now looking at a tablet she had picked up from a small table beside her. She was reviewing something, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was powerful. She was beautiful. And she was entirely out of reach. "No," Ricardo said, his voice gaining a new edge of determination. "Not home. Home is just walls. Drive me to the office." "Very good, sir." Thomas put the car into gear and pulled away from the shoulder, merging back onto the main road. As the mansion disappeared behind the curve of the road and the line of trees, Ricardo felt a shift within himself. The despair that had threatened to drown him moments ago began to solidify into something harder, something more usable. Respect. He respected her. And because he respected her, he knew he couldn't just burst into her life like a storm. He couldn't demand attention. He had to earn it. He looked at his reflection in the window glass. The man staring back looked weary, but the eyes were different. They were no longer looking at the horizon for the next deal. They were looking inward, assessing the damage. He thought about the phone call he had made to the investigator. He needed more than just a name. He needed to know everything. How did she do it? What business did she run? Who were her partners? He needed to understand the woman she had become before he could hope to speak to the woman she used to be. The city skyline began to appear again in the distance, the towers rising like jagged teeth against the twilight. Ricardo picked up his phone again. He opened his messages and typed a new instruction to his investigator. Priority change. I need financial records, public filings, anything on her business ventures. Not just address. I need to know her world. He hit send. The message flew through the digital network, a small packet of data that would begin to unravel the mystery of the last decade. He put the phone down and clasped his hands together. The car sped up, the engine whining slightly as they entered the highway. The lights of the other cars blurred past, streams of red and white. Ricardo closed his eyes. He could still see her on the porch. The image was burned into his mind. The elegance, the confidence, the silence of her success. It was a challenge. It was a mirror held up to his own life, showing him that wealth without purpose was just noise. She had purpose. She had built something real. "Thomas," Ricardo said, opening his eyes. "Cancel my appointments for tomorrow morning. Sir, the board meeting is at 9. The shareholders. Cancel them," Ricardo interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Tell them I have a personal matter. A family matter. The words hung in the air. Family. He hadn't used that word in a context that mattered for years. It felt foreign on his tongue, but right. Thomas glanced in the mirror, seeing the resolve in Ricardo's face. He nodded. Understood, sir. I'll make the calls. Ricardo leaned his head back against the headrest. The vibration of the car was soothing now. He had a plan. He wouldn't knock on the door tomorrow. He wouldn't ambush her. He would learn. He would prepare. He would become someone worthy of standing on that porch. The suspense of the unknown was no longer paralyzing. It was motivating. He knew where she was. He knew she was alive and well. Now he had to find out if there was any space left in her world for him. The road stretched out before them, dark and endless, but for the first time in luxury vehicles waiting to be cleared by security. The brake lights ahead glowed red in the twilight, casting a ruddy reflection on the dashboard. Ricardo sat rigid in the back seat, his mind still reeling from the image of Clara on the porch. He had told Thomas to drive to the office, but his body hadn't fully committed to the command. His eyes were still drawn to the side window, looking back through the rear glass toward the estate they were leaving. Apologies, sir, Thomas said, his hands resting lightly on the wheel. There seems to be a delay at the checkpoint. A delivery truck is being inspected. We might be stationary for a few minutes. Ricardo didn't answer. He wasn't listening to the logistics of the delay. He was watching the white mansion in the distance. It was smaller now, framed by the rear window, but still distinct against the darkening sky. Clara was still on the porch. She had put the phone away and was looking toward the driveway, her expression shifting from professional focus to something softer, warmer. Ricardo leaned forward, his palms pressing against the leather seat in front of him. He felt like an intruder, a ghost haunting the edges of a life he should have been part of. Sir Thomas asked, noticing the shift in posture. Wait, Ricardo whispered. He didn't know what he was waiting for. He just knew he couldn't look away. As if summoned by his desperation, the front door of the mansion opened again. This time, two figures burst out onto the porch. They were small, moving with the boundless energy of childhood. They ran toward Clara, their footsteps silent from this distance, but visible in the way their bodies propelled them forward. Ricardo's breath hitched. He squinted, straining his eyes against the dim light and the tinted glass of the car window. They were children. Boys. They looked to be about 6 years old. They reached Clara simultaneously, colliding with her in a double embrace. Clara laughed, bending down to wrap her arms around both of them at once. She lifted one slightly, then the other, her face radiant with a joy Ricardo had never seen directed at him. But it wasn't Clara's joy that froze the blood in Ricardo's veins. It was the children. The car was still stationary, the engine idling quietly, but inside Ricardo's mind, a siren was wailing. He watched as one of the boys looked up at Clara, saying something that made her smile. The boy turned his head slightly, profiled against the light from the open door behind them. Ricardo felt the air leave his lungs. He knew that profile. He knew the slope of that nose. He knew the way the hair fell over the forehead, slightly unruly, dark and thick. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected the past instead of the present. My God, Ricardo breathed, the words escaping before he could stop them. Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror. Sir, is something wrong? Ricardo didn't answer. He couldn't. He was transfixed. The second boy turned now, chasing his brother around Clara's legs. He looked up, scanning the road, perhaps looking at the line of cars waiting to exit. For a fleeting second, the boy's eyes seemed to lock with the direction of Ricardo's car. Even through the distance and the glass, Ricardo felt the connection. The eyes were dark, intense, inquisitive. They were his eyes. The same eyes he saw every morning when he shaved. The same eyes that had stared back at him from photographs of his own childhood, kept in a locked drawer in his study. They were twins. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, doubling him over slightly. He had known Clara was pregnant. He had assumed, in the vague, disconnected way he thought about the past, that there was one child. A single heir to the life he had abandoned. But there were two. Two sons. He had not only abandoned a wife, he had abandoned half of his own lineage. He had left behind two pieces of himself that had grown without his knowledge, without his voice, without his hand to guide them. Thomas, Ricardo said, his voice trembling, barely audible. Do you see them, the children on the porch? Thomas adjusted the mirror slightly, trying to catch the reflection. I see a woman, sir. And, yes, there are children. Playing, it looks like. They aren't just playing, Ricardo said, straightening up, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. There, look at them. Look at the boy on the left. The way he holds his head. Thomas looked again, more carefully this time. He was a discreet man, trained to observe without commenting, but he sensed the gravity in his employer's voice. They look like, well, if I may say, sir, they bear a striking resemblance to the photographs I've seen of you. From your youth. Ricardo closed his eyes. The confirmation from an outside voice shattered the last of his denial. It wasn't wishful thinking. It wasn't a trick of the light. They were his. The twins were his. The secret Clara had kept wasn't just that she had moved on. It was that she had raised his children in silence, protecting them from a father who had chosen a merger over a birth. The pain was overwhelming, a physical ache in the center of his chest. He thought about the birthdays he had missed. The first steps, the first words, the nights they were sick, the school plays. He had been in Tokyo, in New York, in London, signing papers that now felt worthless. He had built an empire of steel and glass, while these two boys had built a life of laughter and love with a mother who had every reason to hate him. Drive, Ricardo said suddenly, his voice cracking. Just drive. Sir, the gate is still. Find a way around, Ricardo snapped, the desperation bleeding into anger, though not at Thomas. I can't stay here. I can't look at them anymore. Thomas didn't argue. He signaled and managed to navigate the car onto a service lane that bypassed the main checkpoint, a privilege of the vehicle's clearance level. As they accelerated away from the estate, the white mansion disappeared behind the wall of trees. Ricardo slumped back into the seat, staring at the ceiling of the car. The interior light was off, leaving him in shadows, but the image of the twins was burned into his retina, brighter than any headlight. Sir, Thomas said cautiously after a few minutes of silence. Would you like me to contact the investigator again? Update the priority, Ricardo laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Update it, Thomas. There is no priority high enough. There is no file big enough. He rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the heat of his skin. I have sons. 2 sons. And they don't know who I am. That changes things, Thomas observed quietly. It changes everything, Ricardo corrected. He looked out the window. The city was rushing past again, but the lights seemed dimmer now. She kept them from me. Why was it to protect them, or to punish me? Perhaps both, sir, Thomas said. From what you've told me of the past, she may have feared you would try to take them, or that you would try to buy them. Ricardo flinched. Would I have? He asked the question to the empty air. Back then, yes. I thought money solved everything. I thought I could provide for them from afar. He shook his head slowly. I was a fool. A wealthy, arrogant fool. He thought about the way the boys had run to Clara. They hadn't hesitated. They had run to her with total trust, total security. That was what he had destroyed. Not just a marriage, but a sense of safety. He had to be careful now. If he approached them wrongly, if he came in like a storm demanding recognition, he could shatter that security. He could become the villain in their story instead of the father who came home. Thomas, Ricardo said, his voice steadier now, resolved. Cancel the office meeting. Cancel everything for the week. Sir, the shareholders will. Let them wait, Ricardo said. Let the stock drop. Let the world burn for all I care. I need time. I need to think. He paused, looking at his hands. They were the hands of a man who signed checks. He needed them to become the hands of a father. We need to find out everything about them. Their school. Their interests. Their friends. But we do not contact them. Not yet. Do you understand? We watch. We learn. We do not interfere. Understood, sir, Thomas said. Discretion is paramount. Ricardo nodded. He looked back toward the rear window, though the estate was long gone. He could still feel them there, existing in the world, breathing the same air. The weight of the secret was no longer just his guilt. It was a responsibility. He had to earn the right to be called father. He had to prove to Clara that he wasn't the same man who had walked out of that apartment years ago. And he had to prove to those boys that he was worth knowing. The car merged onto the highway, speeding toward the city center. Ricardo closed his eyes, but he didn't see darkness. He saw 2 faces looking back at him, identical to his own, full of life he had missed. The suspense of the unknown was the clouds, but tonight it felt like a mausoleum. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, the digital numbers climbing slowly, each digit a second ticking away in the void of his anticipation. Thomas remained in the car, a silent sentinel, while Ricardo stepped out into the empty lobby. The security guard nodded, swiping him through without a word. He was alone in the kingdom he had built, surrounded by awards and plaques that suddenly felt like hollow decorations. He walked to his office, the vast space illuminated only by the ambient glow of the city filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't turn on the overhead lights. He preferred the shadows. They matched the mood inside him. He poured a glass of water from the decanters on his sideboard, his hand trembling slightly. He set it down on the desk without drinking. Then he waited. It was past midnight when the knock came. It was soft, precise. Ricardo didn't call out. He simply walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was Sterling, the head of his private security and investigation team. Sterling was a man of few words, known for delivering truths that others were too afraid to speak. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand. It looked unassuming, but Ricardo knew it contained the weight of his entire past. "Mr. Vance," Sterling said, stepping into the office. He didn't sit. He stood near the desk, holding out the envelope. "Everything you asked for, and some things you didn't." Ricardo took the envelope. It was heavier than he expected. The paper was thick, crisp. "Did you verify it?" he asked, his voice low. "I need to be sure, Sterling. If this is wrong, if you give me false hope." "We triple-checked the records, sir," Sterling replied, his tone professional but laced with a subtle empathy. "Property deeds, business registrations, birth certificates. It's all legitimate. She didn't try to hide the children's existence legally, she just obscured the connection to you. She used her maiden name for the business. Hayes." Ricardo ran his thumb over the seal of the envelope. "Hayes. Clara Hayes. The name she had before she became Clara Vance. Before she became his wife. Before he broke her." He tore the envelope open. The sound was loud in the quiet room. He pulled out the stack of documents and laid them on the dark mahogany desk. The top sheet was a corporate profile. Hayes Architecture and Design. He stared at the logo. It was elegant, minimalist. Underneath, in bold letters, founder and CEO Clara Hayes. "She owns it?" Ricardo asked, though the answer was right in front of him. "Entirely 100% equity," Sterling confirmed, stepping closer to point at a line on the second page. "No silent partners. No venture capital from your competitors. She started it 6 months after you left. She used her savings to rent a small office space. From there, she took on residential projects. Small renovations at first. Then commercial." Ricardo picked up the next page. It was a list of awards. Regional Design Excellence, 2019. National Heritage Preservation Award, 2021. Dates and achievements scrolled down the page like a timeline of a life lived fully without him. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, a mix of pride and devastation. He was proud of her, incredibly so. But that pride was fueled by the knowledge that he had no part in it. "Look at this project," Sterling said, pointing to a photograph clipped to the file. It was a community center, a beautiful structure with wide windows and open spaces. Completed 3 years ago. She dedicated it to single parents and future generations. She funded the construction herself through the company's profits. Ricardo traced the edge of the photograph with his finger. She did all this. While raising them, the twins were born 2 years after the company was registered, Sterling said softly. She was pregnant with them when she launched the firm. She worked through the pregnancy. She worked through their infancy. There are records of her signing contracts from the hospital. Ricardo sank into his chair. The leather creaked under his weight. He felt dizzy. He had always told himself that he left to provide security. He had convinced himself that without his money, Clara would have struggled, that the children would have wanted for things. He had worn his wealth like a shield, believing it justified his absence. But looking at these documents, the shield shattered. She hadn't struggled. She had thrived. She had built an empire of her own, not with code and mergers, but with design and vision. She had created spaces for people to live in while he had created systems for people to work in. "Why didn't she tell me?" Ricardo whispered, more to himself than to Sterling. "If she was doing this well, why didn't she let me know? I could have helped. I could have made it easier." Sterling hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, with respect, I don't think she wanted it to be easier. I think she wanted it to be hers. There are emails in the archive. From the early years. She was offered buyouts. Large ones. From firms connected to your network. She rejected all of them. She specifically stated in one memo that she wanted no association with Vance Technology." The words hit Ricardo like a physical slap. No association. She had actively scrubbed him from her professional life. She had built a wall not to keep him out of her heart, but to keep his money out of her success. She wanted to prove that she didn't need him. And she had. Ricardo leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, burying his face in his hands. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. He thought about the nights he had spent in five-star hotels, complaining about the stress of a merger, while Clara was likely waking up every 3 hours with twins, drafting blueprints by lamplight. He thought about the car he was driving, worth more than her first office, bought with money that he now realized was surplus to her needs. "Is there anything else?" Ricardo asked, his voice muffled by his hands. "There is the mansion," Sterling said. "The deed is in her name, paid in full upon completion. No mortgage. The liquidity required for that. It suggests her company is valued significantly higher than public records show. She is wealthy, Mr. Vance. Not just comfortable. Wealthy." Ricardo lifted his head. He looked at the photograph of the community center again. He looked at the financial statements that showed steady, organic growth. No spikes from injections of capital. Just hard work. She didn't just survive, Ricardo said, the realization settling deep in his bones. She conquered. She did, Sterling agreed. And she did it alone. Ricardo stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, in the quiet suburbs, Clara was sleeping. The twins were sleeping. They were safe. They were loved. They were provided for. The relief he felt was overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a profound sense of obsolescence. He was not the savior of this story. He was the antagonist who had left the stage, only to return hoping for a cameo. "Sterling," Ricardo said, turning back to the desk. He began to gather the papers, stacking them neatly. His hands were steady now. The shock was passing, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I need you to dig deeper. Not into her finances. Into their lives. The boys. What school do they attend? What do they like? Do they play sports, music? I can arrange that," Sterling said. "But sir, if you get too close, she will know. She has security protocols around her personal life. Almost corporate level. Then be better than her security," Ricardo said, a flicker of his old competitive fire returning, but directed now toward a different goal. "I don't want to intrude. I want to understand. I need to know who they are before I ever speak to them. I won't make the mistake of treating them like assets. They are my sons." Sterling nodded, picking up his briefcase. "I'll have a preliminary report on their activities by tomorrow evening." "But Ricardo," he paused at the door, using his first name for the first time in years. "Be careful. She protected them from you for 6 years. She won't give them up easily. And honestly, looking at this," he gestured to the file on the desk, "she might not want you in their lives at all. You have to prove you're not a risk." Ricardo looked at the file. "I know," he said quietly. "I have everything to prove." Sterling left, the door clicking shut behind him. Ricardo was alone again. The office was dark, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. He picked up the glass of water he had poured earlier and finally took a drink. It was cold. He walked back to the desk and opened the file one more time. He looked at the picture of the community center. He imagined Clara walking through those halls, showing the boys what she had built. He imagined them running through the spaces she designed. He realized then that he couldn't compete with her on wealth. He couldn't impress her with gifts. She had everything she needed. The only thing he had to offer was himself. And he wasn't sure yet if that was enough. He closed the file and locked it in his drawer. He wouldn't sleep tonight. He would sit here and plan. He would strategize not a merger, but a reconciliation. The documents on the desk were no longer just evidence of her success. They were a map of the terrain he had to cross. It was steep, it was fortified, and it was guarded by a woman who had learned to fight without him. But as he looked out at the dawn beginning to break chair since Sterling left, the locked drawer containing the file felt like a lead weight, embedded in the furniture, pulling the entire room down toward the earth. Ricardo rubbed his eyes, the skin rough and dry from lack of sleep. The city outside was waking up, the hum of traffic beginning to rise from the streets below, a symphony of routine that he no longer felt part of. His phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with the name of his executive assistant. Ricardo stared at it. In any other week, he would have answered on the first ring. He would have been demanding updates, scheduling conflicts, resolutions. Now, the sound felt intrusive, like an alarm clock ringing in a house where someone had died. He let it buzz until it stopped. Then it buzzed again. A message this time. Board meeting in 30 minutes. Confirm attendance. Ricardo picked up the phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. The instinct to command, to control, to be the tycoon who moved markets with a signature surged through him. It was a familiar comfort. If he went to the meeting, he could be Ricardo Vance, the visionary. He could talk about quarterly growth and market share. He could hide behind the suit and the title. But the image of the twins' faces flashed in his mind, superimposed over the spreadsheet data he usually reviewed. They didn't care about quarterly growth. They didn't know who Ricardo Vance, the CEO, was. To them, he was a stranger. To Clara, he was a ghost. He typed a reply. Cancel. Indefinitely. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Then he turned the phone face down. The silence returned, but it was louder now. He stood up and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The reflection staring back at him was haggard. The expensive suit was wrinkled. The tie was loosened. He looked like a man who had lost everything, despite standing in the center of his empire. "You are being ridiculous," he said aloud to his reflection. His voice sounded strange in the vast, empty office. "You have resources. You have influence. You can fix this." But the reflection didn't agree. The eyes looking back were filled with doubt. That was the conflict tearing him apart. The part of him that had built Vance Technology believed that every problem had a solution, usually involving capital and strategy. If a bridge was out, you built a new one. If a company was failing, you restructured. But this wasn't a business problem. This was a human problem. You couldn't restructure a broken trust. You couldn't acquire a son like a subsidiary. He walked back to the desk and opened the locked drawer again. He didn't take the file out. He just looked at the edge of the manila envelope. Sterling's words echoed in his head. "She might not want you in their lives at all." The thought was a physical pain, a tightness in his throat that made swallowing difficult. He had spent years believing he was the provider, the protector. He had justified his absence with the belief that his money was a shield for them. Now he knew the money was irrelevant. Clara had built her own shield. She had been the protector. He had been the one who needed protecting from his own conscience. He sat down and pulled out a sheet of fine stationery. He picked up a pen. He thought about writing to Clara. An apology. An explanation. He dipped the pen to the paper, but the ink hovered there, refusing to flow. What could he say? "I'm sorry I chose work over you," it sounded hollow. "I want to meet my sons," it sounded demanding. "I have money to help," it sounded insulting. He put the pen down. The white paper remained blank, a stark judgment of his inability to communicate anything that mattered. The pride of the tycoon warred with the guilt of the father. The tycoon wanted to march to Silver Creek Estates, knock on the door, and demand a conversation based on his status. He wanted to lay out a plan, a schedule for visitation, a trust fund for the boys. It was efficient. It was controlled. But the father, the one who had awakened in the rain 3 days ago, knew that would destroy any chance he had. If he approached them as Ricardo Vance, the billionaire, they would see a wallet, not a dad. If he approached Clara as the man who abandoned her, she would see a threat, not a partner. He had to be nobody. He had to be less than nobody. He had to be a man asking for forgiveness without expecting it. The humility required was suffocating. He had spent decades cultivating an image of invincibility. To strip that away, to stand before Clara and admit he was weak, that he was lost without them. It terrified him more than any bankruptcy ever could. Sir Ricardo jumped. He hadn't heard the door open. Sterling was standing there again, looking slightly surprised. "I forgot my briefcase." Ricardo quickly covered the blank sheet of paper with his hand. "I didn't hear you come in." "You were somewhere else," Sterling observed, retrieving his case from the corner. He paused, looking at Ricardo's disheveled state. "You look like you've been fighting a war." "Feels like it," Ricardo muttered. He leaned back, the chair creaking. "Sterling, tell me the truth. Not the investigator truth. The human truth. If you were in my position, what would you do?" Sterling hesitated. He was a man of facts, not feelings. But he had worked for Ricardo long enough to see the cracks in the armor. "I wouldn't try to buy my way in, sir. People like Mrs. Hayes, they value independence above all else. If you try to overpower her with resources, she'll push back harder. She's proven that." Ricardo nodded slowly. "So I have to be weak." "You have to be honest," Sterling corrected. "Weakness implies you can't do anything. Honesty implies you're willing to face the consequences. There's a difference." Ricardo looked at the blank paper again. "Honesty. I don't know how to be honest anymore. I've been selling an image for 20 years. Then start by stopping the sale," Sterling said. He adjusted his grip on the briefcase. The report on the boys' school activities will be ready by noon. But sir, don't use it to stalk them. Use it to understand them. There's a line. I know the line, Ricardo said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. Thank you, Sterling. Sterling nodded and left. The door clicked shut. Ricardo was alone again. The sun was higher now, the light brighter, less forgiving. He stood up and walked to the coat rack where his suit jacket hung. He took it off and draped it over the chair. He loosened his tie further and pulled it off, setting it on the desk. He rolled up his sleeves. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. He was shedding the armor. He picked up the pen again. He didn't write to Clara. He wrote to himself. I am not here to save them. I am here to ask if I can be saved by them. He wrote the words slowly, the ink flowing dark and permanent. He looked at the sentence. It was the truth. He needed them more than they needed him. That was the core of the conflict. His ego screamed that he was the benefactor, the one bringing value. But his heart knew he was the beggar. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He wouldn't show it to anyone. It was for him, a reminder when the old instincts kicked in. When the urge to fix things with money arose, he would touch that paper and remember. He walked to the window again. The city was fully awake now. The world was moving on, indifferent to his internal crisis. But somewhere in that sprawl, two boys were waking up. They were brushing their teeth, eating breakfast, getting ready for school. They were living a life he had missed. The pain of that missed time was a sharp ache in his chest, but he didn't push it away. He let it stay. He needed to feel it. It was the only thing that was real. The stock prices, the mergers, the accolades, they were illusions. This pain was the truth. It was the cost of his choices. He would carry it. He would let it guide him. He picked up his phone. He had canceled the board meeting. Now he needed to cancel the rest of the week. He dialed his assistant. Mr. Vance, her voice was anxious. We have the shareholders calling. Let them call, Ricardo said. His voice was calm, steady. I have a family emergency. I will be unavailable for an indefinite period. Delegate the authority to Marcus. If anything critical arises, email me. But do not expect an immediate response. Sir, are you all right? I'm trying to be, Ricardo said. He hung up before she could ask more questions. He placed the phone on the desk. He picked up his jacket, but he didn't put it on. He carried it over his arm. He walked out of the office, leaving the lights on. He didn't lock the door. Let the world see inside. Let them see the empty chair. The elevator ride down was slow. He watched the numbers decrease. 50, 40, 30. He was descending from the ivory tower. When the doors opened at the lobby, the security guard looked up, surprised to see him without the tie, the jacket over his arm. Ricardo nodded to him and pushed open the glass doors. The air outside was fresh, cool. He didn't signal for his car. He started walking. He needed to feel the ground beneath his feet. He needed to walk among the people he had spent years looking down on from his tower. As he walked down the sidewalk, blending into the crowd of commuters, Ricardo Vance felt smaller than he had in decades. And for the first time, that smallness didn't feel like failure. It felt like freedom. He was no longer the tycoon. He was just around him, a river of commuters checking watches and phones, oblivious to the turmoil raging within the man in the wrinkled suit. He had walked to feel grounded, to feel real, but now the urgency returned. Walking was contemplation. Action was necessity. He couldn't just wander the streets forever. He had a destination, even if he couldn't admit it aloud. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was cracked slightly at the corner, a flaw he had never bothered to fix because he usually handed the device to an assistant before it reached that state. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Thomas's name. He pressed call and listened to the ringtone. It rang twice before the driver answered. Mr. Vance, are you all right? I was about to circle back. Thomas's voice was tight with concern. I'm fine, Thomas, Ricardo said, though his voice lacked conviction. Come pick me up. I'm on 5th and Main, near the old library. Understood. 2 minutes. Ricardo ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He leaned against the brick wall of the bookstore, closing his eyes for a moment. The sun was higher now, warming the air, but he still felt a chill deep in his marrow. He needed a plan. He couldn't just show up at Hayes Architecture and demand to see Clara. She would refuse him. She had every right to refuse him. He needed a reason, a valid, professional reason that would force her hand without triggering her defenses. A partnership. A merger. Something big enough that she couldn't ignore it, but vague enough that he could navigate the conversation once he was in the room. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. and the knowledge tasted like copper in his mouth. But he told himself it was a necessary deception. He wasn't doing this to trick her. He was doing it to get a foot in the door. Once she saw him, once she heard his voice, the business pretext would fall away. Or so he hoped. Thomas pulled the car up to the curb, the silver sedan gleaming in the sunlight. Ricardo opened the door and slid into the back seat. The familiar scent of leather and conditioning soap enveloped him, comforting and suffocating all at once. He was back in the box. "Where to?" Sir Thomas asked, meeting his eyes in the mirror. Ricardo took a deep breath. "Hayes Architecture. Downtown. Find the address." Thomas nodded, his expression unreadable. He tapped into the navigation system. "Hayes Architecture. Found it. It's in the design district. About 20 minutes away." "Take us there," Ricardo said. He leaned back, closing his eyes again. But he couldn't rest. His mind was racing, rehearsing conversations that hadn't happened yet. He imagined Clara's voice. Would it be cold, would it be angry, or would it be indifferent? Indifference would be worse than anger. Anger meant she still cared. Indifference meant he was truly dead to her. He opened his eyes and looked out the window. The city passed by, a blur of glass and steel. He pulled out his phone again and opened the browser. He typed in Hayes Architecture. The website loaded quickly. The design was clean, modern, using soft earth tones and sharp lines. It was elegant. It was her. He clicked on the contact page. There was a general inquiry number and a direct line for executive scheduling. He stared at the numbers. His thumb hovered over the screen. "Sir," Thomas said softly, "we are approaching the district. Traffic is light." Ricardo didn't answer. He pressed the call button on the executive line. He put the phone to his ear. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each ring felt like a hammer blow to his chest. On the 4th ring, a voice answered. Professional, polished, warm. "Thank you for calling Hayes Architecture. This is Sarah, Executive Scheduling. How may I direct your call?" Ricardo cleared his throat. He needed to sound like the Tycoon, not the broken man. He needed to sound like Vance. "This is Ricardo Vance. Vance Technology. I'd like to schedule a meeting with Mrs. Hayes." There was a pause on the other end. A brief hesitation that felt like an eternity. "Mr. Vance, we weren't expecting a call from you. Mrs. Hayes is quite busy this week. She's currently on site for a project launch." "I understand her time is valuable," Ricardo said, his voice steady. "But this is regarding a potential partnership. A significant opportunity. I believe it would be mutually beneficial. I need 15 minutes of her time. Tomorrow morning." "I see." Sarah's tone was polite but guarded. "I can't promise anything, Mr. Vance. Mrs. Hayes prefers written proposals before scheduling meetings, especially with external partners." Ricardo tightened his grip on the phone. External partners. The words were a barrier. "I don't have a proposal yet. This is a preliminary discussion. I need to speak with her directly. Tell her it's about the new urban development initiative. She'll understand." He was banking on her professionalism. She wouldn't ignore a potential revenue stream, even if she disliked the source. It was a gamble. "Let me check her calendar," Sarah said. The line went silent, save for the faint hum of hold music. Ricardo held his breath. He looked out the window. They were turning into the design district. The buildings here were different, more artistic, more personal. He saw a sign ahead. Hayes Architecture. It was a renovated warehouse, brick exposed, large windows letting in light. It looked inviting. It looked like her. Mr. Vance. Sarah came back on the line. "Mrs. Hayes has a cancellation tomorrow at 10 a.m. She can give you 20 minutes. But she specified that this is strictly business. No personal discussions." Ricardo's heart skipped a beat. She knew. Or she suspected. The condition was a warning. "Understood. Business only. I'll be there." "Great. I'll send the security clearance to your office. You'll need to check in at the lobby." "Thank you, Sarah." Ricardo hung up. He lowered the phone to his lap. His hands were shaking. He had done it. He had the meeting. But the condition hung over him like a sword. No personal discussions. She was drawing the line before he had even stepped foot in the building. "We are here, sir," Thomas said, slowing the car. He pulled up to the curb in front of the renovated warehouse. It was impressive. Vines grew up the side of the brickwork, softening the industrial edge. People were coming and going, carrying blueprints and coffee cups. It was a hive of activity. A living thing. Ricardo looked at the building. This was her kingdom. Not the mansion in Silver Creek, but this place. This was where she spent her days, where she built her legacy. He felt a surge of pride again, mixed with that gnawing regret. He had built towers of glass that people worked in. She had built spaces that people lived in. "Wait here," Ricardo said. He opened the door. "I'll go in alone." "Sir, do you want me to accompany you for security?" Thomas asked. "No," Ricardo said. "This isn't about security. This is about respect." He stepped out of the car. The air here smelled different, like coffee, fresh paint, and cut grass. He walked toward the entrance. The glass doors were heavy. He pushed one open and stepped into the lobby. It was spacious, with high ceilings and exposed beams. The floor was polished concrete. There was a reception desk to the left, made of reclaimed wood. Behind it sat Sarah, the woman he had spoken to on the phone. She looked up as he entered. She didn't smile. She stood up. "Mr. Vance, you're early." "I wanted to see the space," Ricardo said. He walked toward the desk. He felt exposed without Thomas behind him. "It's impressive." "Mrs. Hayes designed it herself," Sarah said. Her voice was neutral. "She'll see you tomorrow at 10. Please bring your ID. Security will need to badge you." "I will," Ricardo said. He looked around the lobby. There were photos on the wall. Projects completed. Schools, community centers, homes. He saw the community center from the file Sterling had given him. He saw the mansion in Silver Creek in one of the interior design shots. She had designed her own home. "Is she here now?" Ricardo asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mrs. Hayes is in a meeting. I'm afraid I can't disturb her." "Of course," Ricardo said. He stepped back. He realized he was lingering. He was hoping for a glimpse. A shadow. Anything. "I'll leave then." "Thank you, Sarah." "Mr. Vance," Sarah said as he turned to the door. He stopped and looked back. "She knows why you're really here. Just so you know. She's not stupid." Ricardo felt the blood drain from his face. I don't know what you mean." Sarah offered a small, pitying smile. "She knows you're not here for a partnership. She knows you found the house. She knows about the boys. She's just giving you a chance to say it properly. Don't waste it." Ricardo nodded slowly. The air in the lobby felt thin. "Thank you," he whispered. He turned and walked out the door. The sunlight hit him again, bright and harsh. He walked back to the car, his legs feeling like lead. He got in and closed the door. He didn't speak to Thomas. He just stared at the building through the window. She knew. She knew he was coming. She knew it wasn't about business. And she had agreed to see him anyway. Was it a trap, or was it an olive branch back to the office? "Thomas," Ricardo said finally. His voice was quiet. "Very good, sir." The car pulled away from the curb. Ricardo watched the building recede in the side mirror. He had 20 minutes tomorrow. 20 minutes to change the course of his life. 20 minutes to face the woman he had broken and the sons he had never known. The suspense was no longer about whether he could find them. It was about whether he could survive the truth. He leaned his head back against the seat. The meeting was set. The stage was prepared. Now he had to wait for the curtain to rise. And he was terrified that when it did, he would find business only. He had spent decades negotiating deals worth billions, staring down competitors who wanted to destroy him, but none of that prepared him for 10 o'clock in the morning. He showered, dressed, and chose his suit with a care he hadn't taken in years. He wanted to look successful, stable, worthy. But as he looked in the mirror, he saw only a man trying to paint over a crack in the foundation. Thomas drove him to the design district in silence. The car arrived 15 minutes early. Ricardo told Thomas to wait. He needed the buffer. He walked into the lobby of Hayes Architecture at 9:45. Sarah was at the desk. She nodded, acknowledging his punctuality, and handed him a visitor badge. It was white, plain, contrasting with the colorful lanyards worn by the employees bustling past. He was an outsider here. He followed her direction to the conference room at the end of the hall. It was a glass box, transparent on all sides. He could see the employees working, typing, laughing. He could be seen by everyone. There was no privacy, no place to hide his nervousness. He sat at the long table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him to stop them from trembling. He checked his watch. 9:55. The seconds ticked by, each one echoing in his ears. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. He imagined her sitting there. He imagined the years of work it took for her to earn that seat. He had bought his seat with inheritance and risk. She had built hers with grit and solitude. The door opened at exactly 10. Clara walked in. She wore a navy suit, sharp and tailored, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She carried a tablet and a file folder. She didn't look at him immediately. She walked to the head of the table, set her items down, and then finally raised her eyes. Her gaze was steady, unreadable. There was no anger in her face, no sadness. There was only a cool, professional distance that hurt more than shouting ever could. "Mr. Vance," she said. Her voice was clear, devoid of warmth. "Thank you for coming." "Clara," Ricardo started, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. He stood up instinctively, a gesture of respect. "Thank you for seeing me." "Please sit," she said, remaining standing until he complied. She took her seat, opening her tablet. "Sarah told me you wanted to discuss a potential partnership regarding the Urban Development Initiative. I have 20 minutes before my next appointment." Ricardo swallowed hard. He had prepared a speech, a pitch about synergies and market expansion. But looking at her, the words turned to dust in his throat. "Yes, the initiative. Vance Technology has been looking to expand into smart infrastructure. Your firm's reputation in sustainable design is unparalleled. We focus on community integration," Clara corrected smoothly, her fingers tapping lightly on the tablet screen. She didn't look up. "Not just smart infrastructure. We build spaces for people, not just systems for data. There is a distinction." "Of course," Ricardo said. He leaned forward slightly, trying to bridge the physical gap between them. "That's exactly what I admire. I thought, perhaps we could collaborate. My resources, your vision." Clara stopped typing. She looked up, her eyes locking onto his. The air in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Mr. Vance, let's be clear. I have reviewed your company's proposal history. You acquire. You integrate. You streamline. You don't collaborate. You consume." Ricardo flinched. "That's not. I'm trying to change how we operate." "Are you?" Clara asked. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. The gesture was defensive, yet powerful. "Because from where I sit, this looks like an acquisition attempt disguised as a partnership. And I'm not interested in being acquired." "It's not about acquisition," Ricardo said, his voice rising slightly. He lowered it quickly. "It's about connection. I thought maybe we could find common ground." "We have no common ground," Clara stated. The finality of the statement hung in the air. "You build towers. I build homes. You prioritize speed. I prioritize stability. Our methods are incompatible." Ricardo felt the walls closing in. The glass room felt like a cage. "Clara, please. Can we not speak honestly just for a moment beyond the business?" Clara's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened slightly. "This is a business meeting, Ricardo. I agreed to meet you under the condition that we discuss professional matters. I do not discuss personal history in the office. My employees are outside these glass walls. My reputation is built on professionalism. I will not compromise that for nostalgia." "It's not nostalgia," Ricardo pleaded, the mask slipping. I know about the house. I know about—" "Stop," Clara said. The word was sharp, cutting through his sentence. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "You know nothing. You know an address. You know a name. You do not know me. And you certainly do not know the life I have built." "I know I made a mistake," Ricardo said, the words rushing out. "I know I left. And I see what you've done. It's incredible, Clara. You did everything I said I would do for you. You did it better." Clara stared at him. For a second, Ricardo thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Pain recognition, but it vanished instantly, replaced by the icy shield. "I didn't do it for you," she said softly. "I did it for me. And for my children. Your approval is not required. Your validation is not needed. And your money is certainly not welcome." "I don't want to buy my way in," Ricardo insisted. I want to be part of their lives. If you'll let me." Clara closed her tablet. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. "Their lives are not a boardroom you can enter because you have a proposal. They are not assets to be managed. They are children, and you abandoned them before they were born. You don't get to walk in here after 6 years and demand access because you feel guilty now." "I'm not demanding," Ricardo said, his voice breaking. "I'm asking." "You're asking in the wrong place," Clara said. She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "This meeting is over. There will be no partnership between Vance Technology and Hayes Architecture. We have no synergies. We have no common ground." "Clara, wait," Ricardo said, standing up as well. He felt desperate, the ground shifting beneath him. "Please, just tell me what I need to do. Is there any way, any chance?" Clara walked around the table. She stopped a few feet from him. She was close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same scent she had worn years ago, but now it smelled different. Stronger. You want a chance, she asked. Her voice was low, meant only for him. Then stop acting like a tycoon. Stop trying to negotiate. But do not come to my office again. Do not use my business to get to my family. If you want to speak to me, you find a way to do it as a man, not as a CEO. But know this. I am happy. We are happy. Do not disrupt that unless you are prepared to stay forever. Because if you walk away again, you don't come back. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked to the door. She opened it and stepped out into the busy office floor. She didn't look back. The door closed behind her, leaving Ricardo standing alone in the glass box. He stood there for a long time. The employees outside continued to work, unaware of the earthquake that had just occurred within the room. Ricardo looked at the empty chair where Clara had sat. He looked at the tablet she had left behind, closed and dark. He felt utterly defeated. He had expected anger. He had expected tears. He hadn't expected this absolute, impenetrable independence. She didn't hate him. She simply didn't need him. And that was a harder wall to break than any hatred. He walked to the door and opened it. Sarah was at her desk. She looked up, seeing his face. She knew. She didn't say anything. Ricardo walked to the exit, his steps heavy. He pushed open the glass door of the lobby and stepped out into the sunlight. The air was warm, but he felt cold. He walked to the car where Thomas was waiting. He got in and closed the door. Sir Thomas asked, seeing the look on his face. Did it go well? Ricardo looked at the building in the side mirror. He saw Clara through the glass of her office, standing by the window looking out. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her team, at her work. She was in her element. No, Ricardo said quietly. It didn't go well. She shut me down. Completely, Ricardo replied. He loosened his tie, pulling it off and throwing it onto the seat beside him. She doesn't need my money. She doesn't need my name. She doesn't need me. Then what do you do? Thomas asked, putting the car into gear. Ricardo watched the building fade as they drove away. I don't know, he admitted. The honesty felt raw in his throat. She said I have to stop acting like a CEO. But I don't know how to be anything else. He leaned his head against the window. The glass was cool against his skin. She gave me a warning. If I come back, I have to stay. No more leaving. No more choosing business over them. Can you do that? Thomas asked. Ricardo looked at his hands. They were the hands that signed contracts. He had to turn them into hands that held children. I have to, he said. Because if I walk away now, I lose them forever. And I can't. I can't survive that. The car merged into traffic. Ricardo closed his eyes. The meeting was over. The business pretext was dead. He had no more excuses, no more masks. He was just a man who had broken something precious and was told that glue might not be enough to fix it. He had to find a new way. He had to find a way to be a father without buying the role. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Been precise, surgical. Do not come to my office again. She had drawn a line in the sand, not out of malice, but out of protection. She was guarding the life she had built, and he respected that, even as it broke him. He couldn't go to her workplace. He couldn't use business as a shield. But he couldn't stay away either. The warning she had issued, if you walk away again, you don't come back, was a deadline he couldn't ignore. He needed to see them. Not as assets, not as heirs, but as children. He needed to know who they were before he attempted to cross the boundary again. He picked up his phone and dialed Sterling. The investigator answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for this call. Mr. Vance, Sterling said. I heard the meeting ended early. She shut me down, Ricardo admitted, his voice rough. She knows I was using the business as an excuse. She told me to stop acting like a CEO. Then stop, Sterling replied simply. But you still need information. I have something. It's not business. It's personal. Ricardo sat up straighter. What is it? St. Jude's Academy. The annual spring showcase. It's tomorrow evening. Music and arts. The boys are participating. Ricardo's breath caught. They play music. The older one, Leo, plays piano. The younger, Max, does violin. They're performing a duet. Sterling paused. It's open to the public, but seating is limited. Parents and guardians mostly. Can you get me in? Ricardo asked. He knew the question was borderline. He was skirting the edge of Clara's warning. But this wasn't her office. This was a public school event. I can reserve a seat in the back. Anonymous donation category. No name attached, Sterling said. But Ricardo, if she sees you, it could undo everything. I'll stay in the shadows, Ricardo promised. I just need to see them. The next evening, Ricardo stood outside the school auditorium. He had changed his clothes. No tailored suit, no silk tie. He wore dark slacks and a simple button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up. He looked like a father, not a tycoon. The hallway smelled of floor wax and nervous excitement. Posters drawn by children lined the walls, bright splashes of color depicting worlds of imagination. Ricardo walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, feeling like an intruder in a sanctuary he didn't deserve to enter. He found his seat in the last row, near the exit. It was dark here, obscured by the projection booth's overhang. Perfect. He sat down, folding his hands in his lap to hide their trembling. The auditorium was filling up. Parents laughed softly, adjusting programs, whispering encouragement to children in stiff clothes. The air buzzed with anticipation. Ricardo scanned the crowd. He saw her halfway down on the left side. Clara. She wore a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked relaxed, smiling at something a woman next to her said. She looked happy. The sight was a balm and a wound all at once. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. The principal walked onto the stage, welcoming everyone. Ricardo didn't listen. His eyes were fixed on the wings of the stage. Then they came out. Leo and Max. They walked with a confidence that belied their age. They wore matching bow ties, their hair combed neatly. They bowed to the audience, then sat at the piano and the chair beside it. Ricardo leaned forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. The first time he would see them do something other than exist. Leo placed his hands on the keys. Max raised his bow. They looked at each other, a silent signal passing between them. Then they began to play. The music was complex, a piece that required synchronization and trust. Leo's hands moved across the piano keys with a fluidity that shocked Ricardo. It wasn't just mechanical practice. There was emotion in the movement. Max's violin sang over the top, weaving through the piano's melody. Ricardo felt a lump form in his throat. He remembered his own childhood. He had wanted to play the piano. His father had told him it was a distraction, that business was the only instrument that mattered. He had sold his first keyboard to buy textbooks. Now, watching his son play the instrument he had been denied, a wave of grief washed over him so strong he had to grip the seat in front of him. They weren't just playing notes. They were talking to each other through the music. When Leo missed a beat, Max adjusted instantly to cover it. When Max's bow slipped, Leo slowed the tempo to give him space to recover. It was a partnership, a bond, something Ricardo had never had with anyone. He watched their faces. Leo frowned in concentration, just like Ricardo did when reviewing a contract. Max closed his eyes when he hit a high note, losing himself in the sound, just like Clara did when she sketched a design. They were a blend of both of them. The realization hit Ricardo with the force of a physical blow. They weren't strangers. They were flesh and blood, carrying his traits but nurtured by her love. The music swelled to a crescendo, the notes filling the dark hall, vibrating in Ricardo's chest. He felt tears prick his eyes. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. For the first time in years, he wasn't hiding his emotion. He was feeling it. As the final note faded, the audience erupted in applause. The boys stood and bowed again, smiling now relieved. They looked out into the dark audience, waving at their mother. Clara was clapping proudly, her face beaming. Ricardo clapped too, softly from the shadows. He wanted to stand up. He wanted to cheer. But he remained seated. Then it happened. Leo, scanning the back of the room, paused. His eyes drifted toward the projection booth, toward the shadows where Ricardo sat. For a second, time seemed to stop. Ricardo froze. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He wondered if the boy could sense him. A father's intuition, a biological pull. Leo's eyes lingered on the dark corner. He tilted his head, curious. Ricardo's heart stopped. If the boy pointed him out, if he asked who that man was, Clara would know. She would know he had disobeyed her boundary. She would know he was watching. He prepared himself for the accusation, for the security guard to come and escort him out. But Leo didn't point. He didn't frown. He just looked. And then slowly Leo smiled. A small, tentative smile directed at the darkness. Then he turned back to his brother, and they walked off stage. Ricardo exhaled a long, shuddering breath. He slumped back in the seat. The applause continued around him, but he felt isolated in his own bubble of emotion. He had been seen. Not recognized, perhaps, but seen. And the boy hadn't turned away. The show continued with other acts, but Ricardo couldn't focus. He stood up quietly and slipped out of the auditorium before the finale. He needed air. He walked out into the cool night of the school playground. The swings moved gently in the breeze. He leaned against the brick wall of the building, closing his eyes. Sterling stepped out from the shadows of a tree line. "Did you see them? They played beautifully," Ricardo whispered. "Better than I ever could have." "Did she see you? No." "But Leo, one of them looked at me. I think he saw me." Sterling frowned. "Is that good? I don't know," Ricardo said. He opened his eyes and looked at the school windows. But he smiled. He didn't look scared. He looked curious. Ricardo pushed off the wall. He felt different than he had when he arrived. The guilt was still there, but it was mixed with something new. Hope. They were talented. They were kind. They were open. They weren't poisoned against him, not yet. Clara had raised them to be curious, not hateful. That was her gift to him, even if she didn't know it. "I need to know more about the music," Ricardo said to Sterling. "What teacher do they have? What practice schedule?" Ricardo, Sterling warned. "Don't push too hard." "I'm not going to interfere," Ricardo said. "I'm going to learn. If they love music, I need to understand it. I can't talk to them about business. I can't talk to them about money. But maybe I can talk to them about music." He walked toward the car where Thomas was waiting. He felt a sense of purpose that had been missing since the gala. He wasn't trying to buy them anymore. He was trying to understand them. The music had shown him a bridge. It was fragile, invisible, but it was there. He got into the car and looked back at the school one last time. The lights were still on in the auditorium. Life was happening inside. He was on the outside, but for the first time, he didn't feel like he was looking at a fortress. He felt like he was looking at a home. And he knew, with a certainty, that rust, a stark contrast to the steel and glass Ricardo had surrounded himself with for decades. He sat on a wooden bench near the edge of the playground, his hands resting on his knees, palms open. He had returned to this spot every day for a week. It was public property, open to anyone, yet every time he sat there, he felt like he was trespassing on sacred ground. This was where Clara brought the boys after their music lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't lurking in the shadows of an auditorium. He was sitting in plain sight, wearing a simple wool sweater and jeans, looking like any other father waiting for his children. But he wasn't their father. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The uncertainty was a constant companion, sitting beside him on the bench, whispering doubts into his ear. He checked his watch. 4:15. The lessons ended at 4:30. He had 15 minutes to steady his breathing. His heart was already racing, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with anticipation. He had seen them from a distance over the past few days. He had watched them run across the grass, kick a soccer ball, share a sandwich on the lawn. He had memorized,